Okay, I'm back at you with the Black Poets. I'm going to do another short lecture here on two wonderful writers, Mr. Gene Toomer and Mr. Countee Cullen, excuse me. Uh, let's talk about Gene Toomer first. Gene Toomer was mostly known for a wonderful book that's considered a novel, but it's not a very conventional novel. It's called Cane. Cane, Cane, not like Cain and Abel. Cane like sugar cane, like that sort of thing. And Cane, that's really the poems now. I'm on page 66 in the book. The poems here, if you look through, these poems all appear in the novel Cane. It's a series of short stories that are kind of interrelated. They're described as vignettes, almost like seeing um, a bunch of short films in an anthology. If you've ever experienced something like that, like not one long movie, but like five interrelated, or not even interrelated, just a compilation of short films instead. If you've ever gone to see like the Oscar shorts at the um, when they're shown in movie theaters or something like that. So kind of an unconventional novel, not a bestseller when it was first written, but it was widely praised at the time by critics, and then its reputation has grown and it's still in print. And I just wanted to show you, just for show and tell, this wonderful series of books I received for Christmas a couple years ago. I have read a few of these before, but I've never read them in this nice edition. These are um, Harlem Renaissance 5 novels of the 1920s. This is this one first volume of the set, and the other set is Harlem Renaissance 5 novels of the 1930s. These are these beautiful hardback editions edited by Rafia Zafar, and they are issued from this thing we call the Library of America. That's its insignia. The Library of America is a non-profit. It's a collaboration between the Library of Congress and several universities, including Rutgers University in New Jersey, where the editorship was held by a professor's name's escaping me for a long time. Anyways, it's a wonderful series of books that comes out. They issue new editions all the time. They're supposed to be definitive editions in a permanent sort of library volume that you can have at an affordable price, that gives us the library, the literature of our society. So these are a noted edition from Harlem Renaissance authors, and guess which is the very first novel in the very first. And they're very long, right? The novels aren't incredibly long, so but the way the text is done, they do these nice bibliographical notes. There's one about Toomer to start. There's these nice timelines in the back. And guess the very first novel in the whole set is Gene Toomer's Cane. Okay, and it takes up the first 135 pages. If you bought it in a kind of regular cheap paperback, it'd be a little longer. In this format, it's more condensed on the page, so they can store more information. But this is a lovely set that I've been meaning to get to, and I need to in quarantine, and not and not play video games and succumb to temptation. All right, let's read the beginning. This first story from Toomer. It's a prose piece, but it's like what we call a prose poem. The difference between poetry and prose is that poetry is, at least traditionally, was in some sort of strict meter that we generally refer to as a verse. So there's a limit to the number of syllables per line. The syllables tend to have a certain metrical pattern or foot, a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, and the lines tend to end in interlocking, related, repeating rhyme scheme. Prose poetry is not those things. Prose poetry is a freer form where you can kind of tell a story, but you're still concerned about the musical, the sonic qualities of language in itself. And you see him mixing the two here in this wonderful vignette, meaning a short prose piece, um, French word, vignette called uh, Carintha. And Carintha is about a woman who's too beautiful. She's a danger to herself and a danger to men. She's a heartbreaker. She's what in film studies, in the study of detective movies, so-called film noir, we call a femme fatale. Okay, so let's listen to this beautiful story by Toomer. Her skin is like dusk on the eastern horizon. Oh, can't you see it? Oh, can't you see it? Her skin is like dusk on the eastern horizon when the sun goes down. And again, think of when the sun is setting, the eastern horizon is on the opposite side of where the sun is setting. It's the side you're not drawn to, but it has that unique kind of color, if you can imagine it. It's like she's what in the skin color hierarchy of the black community, you'd maybe call her like a high yellow, like light skinned person. Okay. Men had always wanted her, this Carintha. Even as a child, Carintha carrying beauty, perfect as dusk when the sun goes down. Old men rode her hobby horse upon their knees. Young men danced with her at frolics when they should have been dancing with their grown-up girls. God grant us youth, secretly prayed the old men. The young fellows counted the time to pass before she would be old enough to mate with them. This interest of the male, who wishes to ripen a growing thing too soon, could mean no good to her. Her beauty is so much that it makes her life, it's a threat to her security and protection. Okay, she's too desired. Men want her before she's ready, before she's quote unquote right. Carintha at 12 was a wild flash that told the other folks just what it was to live. At sunset, when there was no wind and the pine smoke from over by the sawmill hugged the earth, you couldn't see more than a few feet in front. Her sudden darting past you was a bit of vivid color, like a black bird that flashes in light. With the other children, one could hear some distance off, their feet flopping in the 2-inch dust. Carintha's running was a whir. It had the sound of the red dust that sometimes makes a spiral in the road. At dusk, she's like supernatural. You get it? She's not just an ordinary child. She moves in a way that's not human fully, more like a goddess or a god or something. Carintha's running was a whir. It had the sound of the red dust that sometimes makes a spiral in the road. At dusk, during the hush, just after the sawmill had closed, and before any of the women had started their supper getting ready songs, her voice, high-pitched, shrill, would put one's ears to itching. But no one ever thought to make her stop because of it. She stoned the cows and beat her dog and fought the other children. She wasn't good. She was dangerous. She was a free spirit, a unruly child, always the most interesting kind, but the ones that are a pain. Even the preacher who caught her at mischief told himself that she was as innocently lovely as a November cotton flower. Already, rumors were out about her. This is at 12. She said making her grow up too fast because of how beautiful she is. Homes in Georgia are most often built in the 2-room plan. In one, you cook and eat. In the other, you sleep. And there, love goes on. Carintha had seen or heard, perhaps she had felt her parents loving. One could but imitate one's parents, for to follow them was the way of God. She played home with a small boy who was not afraid to do her bidding. That started the whole thing. Old men could no longer ride her hobby horse upon their knees, but young men counted faster. So she's growing up, she's reaching puberty, she's reaching sexual maturity, and she's already lost her virginity here. And you see the story set down south, and that was sort of the thing that critics, like, for example, Langston Hughes praised the novel, for giving a richness of African American experience and not trying to sugarcoat things, not trying to make characters who you would want polite white society to see, and like who they would be okay with and acceptable with, but to show the richness, to show the reality, to show the variety of African American experience, and that includes this sort of rural Southern life and the budding sexuality, the really uniquely powerful, potent sexuality of beautiful young women in throughout all races and colors and creeds. But in this particular case, the same goes for this character, who's kind of both, again, universal character, a femme fatale, but also a distinctly African American black one. Corinta is a woman now. I'm reading on. Corinta is a woman. She who carries beauty perfect at dusk when the sun goes down. She has been married many times. Old men remind her that a few years back they rode her hobby horse upon their knees. Corinta smiles and indulges them when she is in a mood for it. She has contempt for them. Corinta is a woman. Young men run stills to make her money. Young men go to the big cities and run on the road. Young men go away to college. They want to bring her money. These are the young men who thought that all they had to do was to count time. But Corinta is a woman, and she hasn't had a child. A child fell out of her womb onto the bed of pine needles in the forest. Pine needles are smooth and sweet. They are elastic to the feet of rabbits. A sawmill was nearby. Its pyramidal sawdust pile smoldered. It is a year before one completely burns. Meanwhile, the smoke curls up and hangs its odd wraiths upon the trees, curls up and spreads itself out over the valley. Weeks after Corinta returns home, the smoke was so heavy you tasted it in the water. Someone made a song. Smoke is on the hills, rise up. Smoke is on the hills, oh rise up and take my soul to Jesus. Corinta is a woman. Men do not know that the soul of her was a growing thing ripened too soon. They will bring their money, they will die not having found out. Corinta at 20, carrying beauty, perfect as dusk when the sun goes down. Corinta, her skin is like dusk on the eastern horizon. Oh, can't you see it? Oh, can't you see it? Her skin is like dusk on the eastern horizon when the sun goes down. Goes down. And again, so what's happened? She's had this baby and she's gone out and had it in secret in the forest. It's not clear who the father is. It's also not clear, although there's a suggestion with the constant reinforcement of her lighter skin tone, there's a suggestion that maybe there's miscegenation, that her husband, the father of this child, not her husband, sorry, I'm mistaken, the father of her child is possibly not African American. That like many black people, she has white people in her family background, okay? That's an ongoing phenomenon in our society that we've become more socially acceptable. It's become more socially accepted, with Barack Obama's presidency and this sort of thing. But it was always there, okay? The founding fathers themselves had black children by slaves that they forced into sexual duties and that form of enslavement. Okay, so that's Gene Toomer. That's a brief vignette from his wonderful novel Cain. And now let's look on to I'm going to come back with another video about Langston Hughes, but let's look at Countee Cullen now. Countee Cullen was more known as a poet. He's from New York City. He married into W.E.B. Du Bois's family, and he, like Du Bois, was drawn towards communism and socialism because that seemed to represent, and it really did, in reality, an alternative to America's racial segregation, racial terrorism, racism at all levels of society. And they were ready for something different. These beautiful, intelligent, intellectual people who happen to be black They could not abide, not most black people couldn't abide, but they especially could not abide the racial discrimination that they dealt with in America. So let's look at this poem. These are written when he was younger. I'm on page 100. Maybe one of his most famous. Yet do I marvel. And you'll see that's like the punchline of the poem. The title's the punchline. It's a very nice way to think of titling things like your essays or poems you write for me. Take a line from near the end of the poem and make that, or line near the end of the essay, so on, and make that your title. So look at this and wait for that punchline. Yet do I marvel. I doubt not God is good, well-meaning, kind, and did he stoop to quibble, could tell why the little buried mole continues blind. Why flesh that mirrors him must some day die, make plain the reason tortured Tantalus is baited by the fickle fruit, declare if merely brute caprice dooms Sisyphus to struggle up a never-ending stair. Inscrutable his ways are. So you see what happened there. That was the first 8 lines of the poem. It's a sonnet. So the first 8 lines kind of form an idea of like, God is good, well-meaning. He doesn't doubt it, but then when he looks at certain phenomena in nature and hears certain stories in mythology, he's like, I can't quite see how it is that this kind, benevolent God, where's the kindness in this? Why make the mole blind? Why doom Tantalus to always having this thing just out of reach? Why doom Sisyphus? Sisyphus has this horrible fate of pushing a rock up a hill every day, and he gets to the top and it goes back down, and he pushes, and it's a profound metaphor for human existence and work and the daily struggle to like reproduce yourself and your efforts and keep your will and your optimism and everything going. And then you fall back down at the end of the day. So all that, and then he says now in the last 6 lines, inscrutable his ways are. That is God's. Inscrutable meaning you can't understand them, you can't read them, you can't interpret them as non-contradictory. And immune to catechism. That is, you can't think of a dogma like, God is love is a catechism. A simple saying that you repeat and remember. That gives you your articles of faith. They have them in the a Hail Mary is a catechism. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, as earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, etc., etc. Those. I'm not even Catholic, and I know that for some reason. Inscrutable his ways are, and immune to catechism. By a mind too strewn with petty cares to slightly understand what awful brain compels his awful hand. Yet do I marvel at this curious thing, to make a poet black and bid him sing. And you see the priority of his identity there. He is first and foremost, again, to go back to the singularity of black and the universality of larger things. The singularity of Harlem and the universality of blacks everywhere in the world, the internationalism of the new Negro movement. And then here, the singularity of being black, but the priority here is given to the universality of being a poet. Poets are poets regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of class, although they tend historically to come from the literate classes, meaning educated to some extent, meaning on average upper income and so on. But he gives the priority to that first, to make a poet black. To make a poet, not a black man a poet, make a poet black and bid him sing. Like, I do marvel at that. He doesn't marvel at all these other things. All these strange things like how inscrutable God is, how incomprehensible his ways are, that he works in mysterious ways. That we say it's God's plan when we can't figure out what the plan is, okay? And then let's look at this other point, because again, speaking of this universality thing and the difficulty of that, and you guys see the dilemma, right? If you are black and you aim at something higher than just representing your community, you can be called, rightly or wrongly, a sellout. If you are black and you and you write in such a way that you seem to only represent your community, then you're not considered a universal, real poet on the level of Shakespeare and this sort of thing. You're considered, I don't know, limited to that world, okay? And this is, Countee Cullen felt that more than most because he was interested in more universal themes as someone who was curious about socialism and communism, all this stuff. Then call me traitor if you must. This is the next poem on 101 to certain critics. Then call me traitor if you must. Shout treason and default. Say I betray a sacred trust, aching beyond this vault. That is, he's not black enough. He's not distinctly focusing on black experience. I bear your censure as your praise. That is, I don't give a shit either way. For never shall the clan confine my singing to its ways beyond the ways of man. So he sings of mankind, not just of black experience. Okay? And there really isn't a contradiction. That it's not mutually exclusive categories. No racial option narrows grief. Pain is no patriot. You get it? Pain is not unique, distinct to one nation. A sorrow plates his dismal leaf, for all as leaf as not. With blind sheep groping every hill, searching an oriflamme, how shall the shepherd heart then thrill to only the darker lamb? Poets and shepherds is a classical metaphor that poets are seen as sort of guides of the flock, and that they have this sort of moral responsibility to their people. And the oriflamme is like a flag, okay? Searching an oriflamme. When the blind sheep groping every hill searching for, how shall the shepherd heart then thrill to only the dark? It's like, with all these sheep searching after something to guide them, some literary theme, some chief idea, why should I only write exclusively about one? Why shouldn't I try to write about them all or seek out a universality? And it's a great question, and it's one he's addressing to critics, to certain critics who want him to be limited, who want him to be narrowed, okay? And he wouldn't be. And neither would his father-in-law. Du Bois would die in exile, would live in Africa at the end of his life because he felt unwelcome and unwanted in the United States that was dealing with the so-called communist witch hunts and the Red Scare of the House Un-American Activities Committee that dragged all these kind of prominent blacks before the Congress and submitted them to these insane questioning about their political beliefs, okay, in a country that's supposedly founded on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. They were saying, no, but not in that case. You can't be for that. Strange, don't you think? All right, so I'll be right back with another video on the wonderful Langston Hughes and a little bit of music and performance by Hughes, and we'll take it from there.